What's going on, people? My name is Batman, and as I'm sure many of you have heard by now, the other day Bungie implemented a hotfix to patch two significant exploits in Destiny. The first being the Loot Cave. If you are unfamiliar with the Loot Cave, it was this spot on Earth near Skywatch where low-level enemies spawned very rapidly, and people could just mow them down for extended periods of time and farm engrams. So they tweaked the respawn times on it, along with several other popular loot farming locations, to ensure said locations can no longer serve as a profitable venture by just sitting there. And then the second exploit they shut down was the Queens Wrath event, giving out 2 Ascendant legendary upgrade materials every time you dismantled the legendary armor you were awarded for completing one of her missions. Now, this patch has irritated many players, including myself. I'm more understanding of the Loot Cave getting closed, but I didn't even realize the Queen's Wrath giving out a ton of Ascendant materials was an exploit, and I don't think it was an accident to begin with, that it was the way it was. Whereas the Loot Cave is probably just something they didn't anticipate being abused, the Queen's Wrath providing massive amounts of legendary Ascendant upgrade materials, I think had to have been intentional to some degree or another, and we're going to go over that in a minute. But I also know in a week they are releasing another loot patch, and my understanding is they're going to change the name of Ascendant material to legendary material, so legendary shards and legendary energy. Now, I might have read that wrong, but if you're watching this after that patch, when I talk about Ascendant shards and energy in this comm, I am referring to what is now possibly called simply legendary shards and energy, but I digress. Ultimately, what these patches accomplish is to reveal the hollow, redundant, monotonous, and repetitive gameplay that is Destiny endgame content. Now, the raid itself is very cool. If more of the story missions and strikes throughout the game were designed with the creativity and difficulty that is in the raid, this would be an infinitely better game. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Now, the end game begins, I guess, technically when you finish the story missions and you kill the Black Heart and whatnot. By then, you've probably hit level 20. And I didn't sour on the end game content at first, because when my team first went into that raid, we got our asses kicked. And so, okay, we need to level up, so we need to get better gear, which means doing bounties and dailies to acquire better gear and the Ascendants to upgrade it. And then, of course, going into the open worlds and doing the patrols to get Spirit Blooms or whatever other materials you need, or you just are there to do the bounties. But in retrospect, it was monotonous and repetitive from the beginning, and I didn't really notice it because we were working towards a goal of beating that raid, and my ultimate goal is to beat it on hard, so I can use that gameplay for another video I want to do. And when you're working towards a goal, you can find satisfaction in getting closer to that goal, regardless of the gameplay itself. And goals, whether it's simply beating a game's campaign, or reaching max prestige, or getting a new high score in wave defense, or unlocking an Xbox achievement or PlayStation trophy, are the primary appeal of many games, including Destiny. But the problem is, if the gameplay itself cannot stand on its own using high replay value based on dynamic and diverse experiences, then the game itself is going to suddenly collapse like a house of cards once people start running out of goals to work towards. Because the simple truth is that excluding the raid itself, there is nothing you do in the endgame content that you didn't do while beating the campaign. Bounties to complete the same story missions, the dailies and weeklies are the same missions you've already done, but you do them on a harder difficulty and get some upgrade materials, repeating the same 5 strikes over and over again. And this is why people gravitated towards exploits like the Loot Cave. Bungie said they patched it because it's not how they envision people playing Destiny, probably because it's a monotonous, repetitive way to play, but the unfortunate truth is that after you've beaten Sepix Prime a dozen plus fucking times, beating him again is equally monotonous and repetitive, and especially after you've outleveled both the strike itself and the entire Tiger Strike playlist by a significant margin. It is often, very, very often, that you go into a strike playlist and one of the randoms you're paired with, or even both of them, go AFK because they need to complete some bounty, but they don't have the patience to do this strike again. And that used to be frustrating, but nowadays I don't even mind, and I don't think other people do either, because we know we can solo the thing with ease because we out-leveled it a long time ago. So at a certain point, the Loot Cave and farming exploits in general just become the logical choice. If just spamming around outside the Loot Cave is equally boring to replaying the same strikes and story missions 10 million times, but the Loot Cave provides more engrams faster and for less effort, obviously people are going to choose the Loot Cave or some other form of loot farming. It's almost like they'd be silly not to. So they patched a flaw that was merely a symptom of a much larger and systemic problem, which is gamers being forced to excessively replay replay missions and strikes that have no actual replay value to begin with. So my goal now is to beat the raid on hard. And again, let me say that the raid is a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun even when we were getting our asses handed to us. And it is a serious challenge that makes you think, and makes motherfuckers adapt under pressure, and something goes terribly wrong and we gotta compensate for it, and every person has their own unique responsibility, and there's a lot of room for creative problem solving and strategy. I give Bungie mad props on that raid. But keep in mind, many players don't reach this goal at all because they can't even get 6 players together to begin with. And I agree that it would be impractical for randoms with limited communication put together in matchmaking to beat that raid, but Bungie really should have included some sort of hub, maybe like a bar in the tower or something where people could post a bulletin looking for said kinds of players in this time zone and this level and such, because if you're not working towards beating the raid, PvE in this game loses all meaning and value after the first couple hours of gameplay when you beat the campaign, with the exception of people who want to work for exotics and legendary equipment to use in multiplayer. So now that I want to beat this thing on hard, I have to reach level 30 because it becomes exponentially more difficult when the content has you out-leveled, especially at the end when you have to kill those stupid fucking self-destructing supplicant cunt bastards that if you don't kill them fast enough they kamikaze you. But even when you have an exotic and full legendary armor, all fully upgraded and equipped, you still won't be level 30. What it comes down to is getting raid gear, which you get to roll for once you complete the raid as a reward. However, you only get to roll once a week, which means if you don't get raid gear the first time around, you have to wait an entire another week just to hit level 30, which I found especially obnoxious. But regardless, inevitably, when you do finally get that raid gear, you have to sacrifice the 18 to 24 Ascendant shards you already grinded for, and then go grind for another 18 to 24, which is a pain in the fucking ass because basically the only way to get them is the daily heroic missions or public events, and because you can only do each of those once a day, in theory it should take upwards of at least 9 full days just to get one piece of armor fully upgraded. Now to speed the process up, you can do the raid, which usually gives out a lot of Ascendant materials, or until yesterday you could have gotten a lot out of the Queens Wrath event. But they patched that obviously, and the Queens Wrath event is really the epitome of this game's failures, because when they removed the ability to work for Ascendants via this event, it just became an entirely pointless and silly joke, and it's not accurate at all to even call it an event, because what it boils down to at the end of the day is that for a limited time there are extra bounties and emblems and a class item available. I don't think anybody really gives a shit about the emblem or class item because very few people care about those things in general anyways. They don't add to your stats or anything. It's aesthetic stuff, and if you're a warlock, the armband that is your class item is usually unnoticeable. And of course, to obtain either of those things, you do have to do a fuck ton of the Queen's bounties and story missions. I mean a fuck ton. And the bounties themselves are mostly the same bounties you would have gotten at any other time. You know, kill Sepix Prime, kill X amount of this type of enemy, gather X amount of stuff from this type of enemy, and those are actually the exact same bounties at the end of the day. But then the extra juicy reward is that when you complete a Queen's bounty, you earn the right to do a story mission in the Queen's name. The story missions themselves are the same missions you've already done several times probably, and you don't even have to do them on a higher difficulty. There's nothing at all unique about the tasks themselves, and in my experience it was always either the first mission or the last mission, and that got really fucking old really fast after I did all 5 Queen's bounties 2 days in a row and played the same 2 missions 5 times each in 2 days. Now, I didn't mind that much at the time just because I was earning a lot of Ascendant materials, but of course, that's no longer the case. Once you beat the story mission, you're rewarded with a piece of legendary armor. It's always either a helmet or a robe. I haven't heard of anyone getting anything other than a helmet or a robe, the same helmet and same robe with the same stats every time, with the exception that sometimes you get a helmet or a chest piece that is restricted to a different class, so you can't wear that anyways. So when you could dismantle the armor for upgrade materials, it was still worth it to go through these monotonous, repetitive tasks. But now that they've taken that out, there is absolutely no point to completing the Queen's bounties more than twice. Once you have the legendary head and chest pieces for your class, there's nothing more to be gained from grinding out these frustratingly repetitive bounties and missions. People should be able to conclude their business with this event in less than a day. I mean, you don't even have to complete all 5 bounties to get the max reward from this event unless you're desperate for the Queen's emblem or something, in which case, have fun doing 50 bounties, most of which are the same as they were the day before, and require the same story missions every time just for an aesthetic emblem that very few people will actually notice or even give a shit about. Now, this event in its patch, I think, lay bare the grave miscalculation that Bungie has made with this game. Like I said, I don't think it's an accident that originally we were getting a shitload of upgrade materials from dismantling the Queen's armor, because by the time this event is over, there will have been enough opportunity to do like 50 of the Queen's missions and have 50 pieces of legendary armor. But if it's only possible to obtain a max of 6 different pieces of gear, only 2 of which will be equipable to your class, then obviously the only real incentive to keep doing the Queen's Wrath missions after you got the 2 pieces of gear for your class was the legendary Ascendant upgrade materials you got for dismantling all the redundant armor. Now take this with a big grain of salt because I'm hypothesizing based on limited data, but I think that originally the Queen's Wrath event was designed to encourage people to start new characters, because if you can get a player to start a new character, in theory they should end up playing the game a lot more, because they'll be working on a new character and it's all about playtime. That's what Bungie and Activision want, is you spending as much time on this game as possible. That's why the only consistent way to get legendary upgrade materials is the daily heroics, because they want you getting on every single day. The more time you spend playing this game, the more likely you are to buy the DLC, to buy the next game, to get involved more in the universe, and perhaps buy physical merchandise like books. We know Halo made a shitload of money off of just its books, and most importantly, the more time you spend playing this game, the more likely you are to encourage your friends to get the game you play, and the more likely your friends are to listen. But if you stop playing the game 2 weeks out, you'll tell your friends not to get it because you're not playing it anymore. Word of mouth is the most powerful marketing tool games have, and playtime is what drives word of mouth. And a new character has the potential to basically double people's playtime, right? The trickiest part is incentivizing them to start that character in the first place, and that's what I think the Queen's Wrath event was originally designed to do. I think their original intent with this was to run the event 2 weeks after the game's release, and any of the players who were still struggling to get a higher level and experience the raid and endgame content and whatnot could use this event to speed that process up via free legendary armor and free upgrades, and then said players would be encouraged to start a new character, and especially if using this Queen's Wrath event they had already obtained 2 free pieces of legendary armor for another class. I mean, if you do the Queen stuff enough, you'll have a legendary head and chest piece for all 3 classes. Then you say, well, I can start a new character and just have legendary armor as soon as I'm level 20. Awesome, right? Because you can transfer shit through your personal vault to your other characters, and you could even transfer more legendary armor so your next character could dismantle it and have enough Ascendant material to have 2 fully upgraded pieces of legendary armor waiting for them as soon as they are a high enough level. That right there incentivizes getting a new character, and that's exactly why they make it possible for you to obtain gear that isn't equipable to your class. If they had a trading system, then okay, a warlock gets a hunter helmet, they can sell it to a hunter. I fucking spent 23 motes of light at Xur and get an exotic titan chest piece out of the engram that I can't use, okay, I can sell it to a titan. But there is no trading system, and so when you get an item restricted to a different class, it has no value to you whatsoever. And it of course begs the question, why even make it possible in the first place to obtain said gear restricted to a different class? Well, because they want to incentivize you starting a new character, because if you put it in the vault, which all of your characters can access, then suddenly it becomes very useful. You got this exotic titan helmet, you don't want it to go to waste, so you start a new titan character just to use the exotic titan helmet. But this system collapses entirely if people simply refuse to start new characters, and that is the trend I have seen. I certainly won't be starting a new second character. I don't know many people that are, because who the fuck would want to? You've already replayed every strike a dozen times. You've probably played every story mission at least a couple times. You've already spent hours driving around the same exact caves in the open world, and you've probably done every different possible bounty at least a few times. Your first character was a painfully repetitive grind. Why would you want to double down on that experience? I think Bungie removed the upgrade materials as a reward for the Queen's Wrath because they were tracking people's playtime and realized that when people finish the raid or simply get full legendary and an exotic, that they stop playing, because once you've beaten the raid, or if you don't have the 6 people to beat the raid, once you have your fully upgraded legendary exotic armor, there is absolutely nothing to do in this game that you haven't already done at least a dozen times. So they nerfed the Queen's Wrath event because suddenly their new strategy is to keep you from finishing your first character for as long as possible, because the harsh reality is that after you beat the raid, after you finish that first character, there is not one thing, not one, to do in this game that you haven't already done several times over. What they should have done is put more replay value into multiplayer, because multiplayer is the end game content that keeps on giving. Multiplayer is why people got on Halo every day, it's why they get on COD every day, and Destiny MP is a lot of fun, but Bungie didn't put enough stock into it this time. There's only 4 playlists, all of which are deathmatch variants. There are only 2 vehicles, there are very few maps, and many of those maps aren't available to the 6v6 game types such as Anomaly or Asylum or the Burning Shrine, and with a fully randomized loot system and no recorded stats, there are very few goals for people to work towards in multiplayer, and even if they're using MP to get better gear because the reward system is random, there's no incentive to try harder or do better. These are my final opinions on Destiny. It was worth the $60, but brutally overhyped, especially the social aspect of it. Other players in the open worlds and in the tower might as well not be there. They might as well be AI with funny usernames like Trollball69 that wander around aimlessly and stand next to vendors sometimes. There's no possible interaction among players in these open worlds besides dancing with one another. This is not a social game, that was false advertising. The shared world shooter mechanic is a hollow, pointless joke. Before this game launched, Bungie said there would be no day one reviews available because they didn't let critics play the game until it had actually launched, their reasoning being that if the world wasn't populated with other players, they wouldn't get an accurate portrayal of the game, but that's simply not true. The other players in the world make absolutely no difference to the gameplay itself. If they weren't there, it wouldn't change anything. I think they purposely put off day one reviews so that critics couldn't skewer this game before they were able to fully maximize on their 2 years of intense hype. I don't think it deserves a 6 out of 10, but an 8 out of 10 game doesn't deserve 2 years of hype and Newsweek special editions and skyscraper-sized banners in New York. I know for many of you it is painful to hear these words because you wanted this game to be so much more, because you believed this game would be so much more. Please believe it was even more painful for me to speak them. I, who held enough hope for this game that over a year ago I released a 17-minute video saying that it was the next big thing, that it would defeat COD. I, who am probably most let down of all. I'm sorry I have to always end up shitting on these games. I realize I have badmouthed every game I've played on this channel. I am considering quitting gaming, and YouTube altogether. Destiny, Tor, ESO, Ghost, Titanfall, and now Destiny. Perhaps it's my fault for having expectations too high, for expecting the next Halo 2. Perhaps such a thing isn't even possible anymore. These disappointments bear heavy on my heart, and I can only take so much more. This is Batman returning to orbit.